Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design. We're really excited to be joined again by Dr. Melissa Marselle. She's lecturer in environmental psychology at the University of Surrey, and she also has a fascinating book out, Biodiversity and Health in the Face of Climate Change. She's involved in so many things, she runs so many things, and she's an inspiration to all our students as well. I'm going to let Melissa talk about what she's doing, but we did speak before on the Journal of Biophilic Design, and listeners and watchers on YouTube, you can search for it on YouTube and also on the RSS feeds and on our journalofbiophilic.design.com. It's called Complex Patterns, Biodiversity and Nature Views. And today we're going to be talking about nature and health in an urban setting. Melissa, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again. Yeah, excellent. And obviously I'll put links in the spiel that goes with the podcast and also on the website journalofbiophilic.design.com. But can you tell or remind the listeners as well a little about what the focus of your research is, please, and why it's important right now?
Yeah, so I focus on the mental health benefits of natural environments. And that's important right now, I think, for all of us. The COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted that contact with nearby nature where we live helped us deal with the stressors of the pandemic, but also its consequences of lockdown. It was, an opportunity for us to get away from our homes, to meet other people safely, and an opportunity for physical activity. So it's been really great to see so many people realize just how important nearby nature is for our health and well-being. But in addition, my work looks specifically at what's the nature of nature? What types and qualities of nature do we need to bring back into cities for both the health and well-being of people and the planet?
Well, maybe we could talk about that. What is the nature of nature?
So we have a lot of research studies looking at the health benefits of nature, and they generally compare a generic urban environment, usually a 4-lane highway next to the university, compared to just a generic natural space, which is usually any sort of natural space in and around a university campus. And we have about 40 years of research on that, and consistently it shows that compared to the 4-lane highway or the urban environment, the natural environment has beneficial effects, the restorative effects, but also health effects. But we don't really know what the nature of that nature is, that that campus, that environment, what type of environment is it? Is it a green space, or is it a blue space like a lake or a river? Is it a forest or a park? And then beyond that, what's the quality of that environment? Does it have a lot of biodiversity? Do people consider it natural, or is it a bit artificial? Is it safe or beautiful? So that's where my research really is now. So looking at which types and qualities of nature influence mental health.
Okay, great. I mean, maybe we should talk about actually why do we, you and I know we need nature in cities, and obviously a lot of our listeners will understand why we need nature in cities, but maybe for those who are still kind of sitting on the fence, could you kind of explain why we need nature in cities, particularly from your point of view?
No problem. So urban environments have a lot of benefits for humans. But they also have a lot of environmental stressors. There's a lot of unwanted noise. There's a lot of other people, crowding, cars, and things like this. So there's a lot of stressors in cities that can contribute to poor mental health. They also might not be designed in a way to facilitate physical activity as well. Think about your standard city in the United States is just built for just driving, right? So cities can be unhealthy to us, but at the same time, cities are growing. It's projected that, about over 5 billion people are going to be living in cities in the next 5 years. So more and more of the world is being transformed into cities, which means that we're transforming agricultural land or that green belt land into cities. And so we're losing more nature and we're transforming it into these urban environments that aren't good for our physical and mental health. So at the moment, the UN has this decade of rewilding, and the idea is to rewild cities, to bring nature back into cities, both for the benefits of biodiversity and plants and animals, but also for our benefit as well.
I love that, imagine that. I just, the whole, if that was really, if that could really be done, if that was just like a thing that, we could rewild our cities, I mean, that would just be so, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, God, the environment, imagine the environment. Obviously towns and cities are, are sort of doing their bit, and they're bringing in pocket parks and parks, and there's just mini forests, nature walks, waterside walks, and other spaces. Obviously from an environmental psychology point of view and all the research that you've done, are some spaces better than others, or does it depend where it is, or does it depend on the environment, or, what's the, is an urban park just as good for our health as an urban forest, or, is there a better one than others?
It's a really good question. And this is one of my questions, as well. Like, as I said, most of the studies have compared a generic natural environment to a generic urban environment. And we find that the natural environment compared to the urban environment has a benefit. But then, the next question is, well, is an urban forest just as good as an urban park? And this is a really important question, because cities can't all plant forests, and we can't transform or rewild our parks into forests in some places in the world. And so, so we can't all have forests. We can't, reintroduce a forest into a city. So we kind of need to know what really matters for our health and well-being. In addition, if we're going to be prescribing people to have contact with nature, it's really important to know which types of environments are going to be effective or ineffective. If my doctor or your doctor prescribes you to go for a walk in your local park, we need to know if urban parks are effective. And so I was part of a group of researchers where we systematically investigated the previous literature to look exactly at this fact, looking at studies that compared forests to parks to see if there's any difference. And what we found was that most types of green space have a beneficial effect, that all types of green space are good for our emotional well-being. So they're good for making us happy and reducing feelings of sadness. And that when we compare a park to a forest, what we find is that all green space seems to matter. That it's not one single type of urban green space that works for everybody everywhere. There's no silver bullet or green bullet, as we could say. So basically it looks like an urban park is just good as an urban forest.
Okay, that's great. And sort of what about places with water? Are they good for us as well? Sort of like canals, or if there's a park with a lake, or, is that added benefits, or how does that affect us in particular when you're near water?
Yeah, that's an excellent question as well. So we also looked at the literature looking at blue spaces or water environments. And this research is less developed than the green space literature. And a lot of it is based in the UK because we have a considerable coastline here in the UK. Not all countries or places will have access to a coast or the ocean. So we looked at and compared coasts to studies that looked at inland waters. So things like lakes, rivers, canals, as you mentioned. And what we found was that there seemed to be more of a benefit from being near the sea than inland water, but that could just be because there's less research in inland waters. So again, it seems like all type contact with any sort of environment with water is beneficial,
Okay.
but that being closer to the sea seems to have a greater effect than, say, living within 5 kilometers of it. So I think with regards to the ocean or blue spaces, we're more interested here, I think, on the experience that you're having with it.
Yeah. I suppose when you talk about experiences as well, can you sort of just touch on that a little bit? Like, is it sounds and smells and color, and what exactly, what's sort of going on with in our minds? I mean,
Yeah.
sort of, yeah, psychology point of view.
Yeah. So when we think about how we can have contact with nature, it's you can break it down into 2 different ways. The first is our exposure to that environment. So think about, frequency and duration, our dose. So am I going to the coast once a week, or do I go to the coast maybe once a year? And when I'm there, how long am I there for? Am I there, am I spending a holiday at the coast, 1 week, and I'm there on the coast for that entire time, or do I go to the coast once a week for maybe an hour? So first of all is our exposure to the natural environment. In the UK, and I think the US, we have recommendations for physical activity, and it's generally 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And, we don't know yet in the literature if we need to have 30 minutes, 5 days a week of contact with green or blue space. But then after our exposure is our experience with that environment. So we're in the environment, how are we experiencing it? And you're absolutely right, Vanessa. The first way we can experience that environment is through our 5 senses. We can notice the visual diversity of the environment, the bird song, we can smell the variety of plant smells or flowers. So that's one way that we can experience the environment. And we see a lot of people nowadays wearing headphones when they're walking. They're going for hikes, long distance hikes with headphones, and that's going to change the experience than if you're not wearing headphones listening to like a podcast like this one. But also our experience can depend on our physical proximity to it. So are we physically present in that environment? So are we walking in that environment, for example? Or are we experiencing that environment without being physically present? So are we having contact with nature by listening to birdsong on our headphones? Are we having contact with nature by watching the David Attenborough documentary? People had screensavers of like fish, right? Like that sort of interaction with nature is indirect. But then we can also have interaction with nature based on the different experience of like we're intentionally there. Mm-hmm. So am I doing yoga in the park, or am I doing yoga at home? So so my purpose of being in a park is intentional. I'm going to this environment to be in nature. Or am I in this environment as an incidental byproduct of something else? Mm-hmm. Am I in the park because it's just a shortcut to get to the train station? Or am I here because it's just a nice place where I can be safe to meet with friends outdoors during a global pandemic? And just the way that we have experiences, and both through our 5 senses, but also what we're doing, if we're physically present or not in it, if we're there, intentionally or incidentally to another activity, will influence sort of what we get out of that environment.
I suppose that's the difference. As some people talk about being mindful and being present in a moment, I suppose it's the same thing. I mean, obviously, even if you are cutting across the park to get to your, your train station or wherever it is, that's just, it might be, unintentional, but it's given you a benefit, isn't it? But like, do you get added benefits if you are intentionally walking through that park and you are in that moment looking and resonating and listening, like you're saying, instead of putting your headphones on, enjoy the birdsong first thing in the morning as the sun's coming up, if you're getting the early train or whatever. So, use it to your advantage, I suppose you could say, changing our mindset if it's something that's just there by default, that actually we make the most of it. We can almost ramp it up. We can sort of turn up the volume of the benefit really of nature for us, maybe.
Perfect. You said it better than me. Thank you. I mean, that's exactly it. It's like, yeah, it's this it seems like a mindful interaction with the environment, and you'll get more added benefits than if you're not having. So absolutely, just
yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, but that's obviously it's actually psychology. It's science. It's not just, you know, just go out and, oh, you know, it's some people don't, you know, won't take it on board because they think it's too fluffy, but actually there is a psychological benefit of doing it. So, you know, if people want to go down that route, the science says it, you know, proves it, sort of thing. So I mean, we spoke before, and I've just found it really fascinating, and I could keep talking about the sort of complex patterns and biodiversity and nature views and all this kind of thing. And so obviously one of the benefits of bringing park in greenery is to help biodiversity in a region, but you also look at how biodiversity, but a biodiverse natural environment is good for us as well, don't you? You know, you have this thing. I mean, can you explain how having a more biodiverse natural environment is beneficial to us?
Yeah. So when I first started really breaking down what is the nature of nature, you know, the different types, but also the biodiversity quality. So biodiversity is the diversity, the different types of plants and animals or the elements in a certain green or blue setting. And it has an effect on our health. But I found initially that it was hard to explain how. And so I worked with a group of about 25 different experts from various disciplines, from psychology to medical science to ecology, where we created a different framework for identifying the pathways that biodiversity influences our health. And the first way was that biodiversity impacts our health by reducing harm. That biodiversity provides us with medicines and food, but it also can provide us with environments that reduce air pollution and noise pollution, and also can reduce the impacts of heat in urban settings. So the first way that biodiversity influences our health is by reducing harm. The second way, though, is on the flip side, it can also create harm. So biodiversity can also harm us. Think about, you know, viruses like, you know, COVID or Ebola, allergies. You know, these are all ways that biodiversity of trees and plants and animals can harm us. We can have a contact with an animal that can bite us or hurt us, you know, like a bear or a rabid dog. So biodiversity can create harm, but it also can reduce harm. And then the last two ones are biodiversity can also restore our capacities. So that spending time in a biodiverse environment can help restore our depleted capacities to deal with life stressors. So spending time in biodiverse environments can help restore us from our ability to focus and direct attention. There was an article yesterday in The Guardian about how spending time socializing is really tiring because we're not used to it, and it takes a lot of focus and to be charming and to talk to friends, and it's just taking a lot out of people because we're not used to it. But being in nature helps restore that ability to focus attention, as well as help us recover from stress. And then the last way biodiversity influences our health is by building our capacities. So it's not restoring a depleted resource, but building our capacities to deal with any future stressors. So it's stuff like providing an environment that may be beneficial for physical activity, or a biodiverse environment might be a nice place for social interaction where you get social support from friends. A biodiverse environment might influence place attachment or place identity, thing which we know has an influence on our well-being, or that, and this is the favorite, contact with biodiversity might influence transcendental experiences, like a sense of awe or wonder. And those experiences, bring uplift and happiness and joy, and that over time will have a benefit on health and well-being.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the key things for me, actually, for biophonic design, is the fact that that can bring, even in interior spaces, when we create, we put maybe do some like beautiful landscaping inside, or we do a great moss wall, or we have lovely big windows to let lots of natural light in that have great views, or if there's a dynamic wallscape, with projections and videos with soundscapes, or there's a waterfall in the middle, or look at Singapore airport. I mean, that can create that awe feeling. And if we can do that, and you mentioned about some biodiverse scapes are negative for us, and you mentioned COVID and Ebola and stuff, and obviously that we could argue that that's also created from a man-made intervention, who's kind of may have screwed that up slightly, but we're not going to go there. But using, like you're saying, there are some biodiverse environments that are better than others, and it's actually, that's what we're talking about, is about creating. We're not talking about putting lions and having them roaming free in the street, or having that kind of, so we're talking about creating the environments that are safe and beneficial for us. I mean, we do have the knowledge and we have the benefit to be able to create environments that are good for us. So let's do that. That's what we're talking about here, as you say. So with that in mind, I mean, which sort of biodiverse environments are better than others? I mean, are some, would you kind of, if you had like, some biodiverse environments better than others?
I don't think from the research I'm able to say that a botanical garden is better than a forest or anything like that. I don't think there's enough data, but that study would be fantastic. I'd love to have people, randomly assigned to spend time in a botanical garden or an old growth forest and see if there's any difference in the effects.
Yeah.
But it seems from the research, it's about the level of biodiversity. Mm-hmm. So the last podcast, I was talking about complexity and talking about how a moderate level of complexity seems to be most preferred. And we seem to find that for health and well-being as well. So a complex biodiversity could be also understood about an environment's complexity. And based on theories from Roger Ulrich and others, it seems like too much complexity isn't good for our health and well-being, and too little is also not good. And it seems like in the Goldilocks metaphor that it's just right. A moderate amount is just right. And there was a really cool study that was done where they had 64 different pot plants, and each pot plant, they then varied this species richness. So they planted all 64 pot plants with just the same herb, so species richness of 1. And then they would get people to sit down. They just grabbed people who were in a park, had them sit down, opened up the curtains, and then had them view this environment for 2 minutes while measuring their heart rate. And then they then changed the pot plants, and they then planted maybe 32 different species of plants. And then they repeated it, got another participant, had them look at the environment for 2 minutes while measuring their heart rate. And then they repeated that again, but they had 64. So every pot plant was a different species. And then they repeated it again with people. And what they found was that heart rate reduced the most when they were looking at the 32 different species. Mm-hmm. So that that means that it was the most relaxing. So when people looked at just the one species, or when they looked at the 64 different species, heart rate didn't really change all that much, but it reduced a lot more when looking at the moderate amount, so the 32 different species. So it seems like if biodiverse environments are better than others, it seems like there's a sort of a Goldilocks sort of aspect here where there's a moderate amount. It's not too much, but it's also not too little.
Okay, great. So it's visual complexity, isn't it? We say like some spaces are too visually complex. I mean, Dr. Sally Augustin was staying with me. She's over, she's an environmental psychologist as well. And she was looking at my space, and I've got lots and lots of books on that side. I mean, this side looks quite calm behind me, but the front in front of me is like lots of books and stuff. And we was talking about how just, you know, you just need it just right, like you say, you know, it's the Goldilocks thing. So it's good to know that that's in nature as well. So having, you know, planting and creating walls that have just got just enough mix of planting is great. So I mean, obviously one of the things as well that you talk about is that, you know, designing cities with nature near the home. So I mean, there is, and I'm really passionate about that actually in an urban environment where, you know, particularly if it's social housing, or it's in, you know, tower blocks and what, you know, and you can't get out for whatever reason, or you just go to your local shop, or, you know, even older generations, for instance, or people who are disabled and they want some independent living, but they can't, they're dependent on somebody to take them further away. I mean, I would love to have, you know, there's fruit trees, and, you know, so there's like community spaces and stuff, you know, actually right bang wallop outside your door, you know, or at the end of the street or something, so you can see kids play amongst them, and you can meet your friends, and you can go and have a cup of tea, and, you know, take a flask and go and sit under some trees. I think that would just be, I mean, that's bringing community together. I mean, for you, I mean, why do you advocate bringing nature close to home?
I mean, in addition to all the reasons that you said, so there was research done in the 80s looking at nearby nature. All right, so we could back up. So the first study on the health benefits of nature was published in Science by Roger Ulrich in 1984. And he had people who had just come out of surgery, and he randomly assigned them to recover after surgery in a hospital room that either had a view of a brick wall or a view of one tree. And he found that people who were recovering after surgery with a view of one tree were discharged out of hospital faster. It reported less pain as well. And so that was really the first study showing that there was a benefit from nearby nature. And then that sort of was replicated by Moore in 1981. It couldn't be replicated, but Moore had prisoners in a US prison system, and prisoners don't get to choose which prison cell they're in. And they found that prisoners who had a view from their prison cell of nature had fewer sick days than prisoners who didn't have a view of nature. And so this is all going back to work that was done in the 80s, finding that nearby nature has a benefit for our physical health. And then fast forward to 2020, and I have a data set where I have all the trees on the street in the city of Leipzig mapped, but I also have another data set available from the city of Leipzig on the medications that people have been prescribed. And so I wanted to see if there was a relationship between street trees of public amenity that could be planted anywhere in a city and antidepressant prescriptions. And I wanted to see about this dose element. I wanted to see, just as you're saying, how close to the home do these street trees need to be? And so looked at 100 meters around the home, 300 meters, 500 meters, half a kilometer, and 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer from the home. And we found, and we looked at both species richness and abundance. So the different types of trees on the street near your home, and the number of trees on the street near the home. And we found that the species mix didn't matter, but what mattered was the number of trees immediately close to the home and within 100 meters had a marginal effect at reducing the risk of being prescribed antidepressants.
Now that is really important. That's really important. Do you have, I think you've sent me, and I've got there's loads of links that I've got latest papers and all that kind of stuff. Did you publish that at all? Did you publish that research? Yeah, because
that was published in the journal Scientific Reports in December 31st, 2020.
Okay, great. Well, okay, I've got it. Yeah, I've got it. There we go. urban tree biodiversity and antidepressant prescription scientific reports. I'll put the link to that on the website, so listeners who I'm sure we're going to be really fascinated by that, you know, I think that's going to kickstart lots of discussions, we hope, with counsellors and things.
well the most amazing thing about that study was we looked at the dose, so it was really only 100 meters around the home that street trees had a marginal effect of antidepressant prescriptions. But then we looked at for whom does street trees have an effect on antidepressant prescribing. And so we looked at people who are most at risk of being prescribed antidepressants, and that's women. And we also looked at the unemployed, and we looked at people with low socioeconomic status. We didn't find any difference between men and women or unemployed and employed on street trees around the home and antidepressants. But what we did find was an effect with people with low socioeconomic status. People with low socioeconomic status are at greater risk for being prescribed antidepressants than people with high socioeconomic status or people who are rich. And so what we found was that when a person with low socioeconomic status lives 100 meters around the home with very few street trees, their risk of being prescribed antidepressants is about 8%. But if that same person lived within 100 meters of a lot of street trees, that reduced their risk of being prescribed antidepressants by half, to 4%.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's good. So, you know, it saves money ultimately, you know, for the NHS and all that sort of stuff too. So there's benefits all around. Yeah. So I mean, how can we bring more nature into our built environment? I mean, what would be like a couple of things sort of thing? How can we do that?
Yeah. So the reason that we focused on street trees in that study is because they're a public amenity. They're not private land or private space, and they can be easily retrofitted into existing urban areas. So as we were talking earlier about rewilding cities, there are many different options available, but one that's cheap and easy to do, it's a lot easier to retrofit or plant a tree on the street than it is to put in a new park or urban forest into a city. And so one way that you can bring nature back into cities is on these small scale green interventions like planting street trees. And our study was suggesting that it's more trees on the street that has a benefit. But more importantly, it's where you plant them. So it's planting the trees on the street near people's homes, where people live, for all the reasons that you said before, for those individuals who can't get outside. So it's not planting street trees in the business district. It's not planting street trees, along the street of an existing park or urban forest. It's planting them where people live in residential areas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Do you have a take on obviously we talk about trees and you're focused on trees, but have you also do you have an opinion really or as well personally about having like I always talk about that incredible edible Todmorden, which I can't pronounce and I still can't pronounce, but Dr. Joanne Leach mentioned it once to me on one of the podcasts we did, and it's just stuck with me because I just think it's such a good idea, because you can riff off that in so many different ways, having like these community spaces where everybody comes together. I mean, do you have an opinion about those? Do you think, I mean, obviously they are good for us, but do you, in your opinion, is there any research or anything? What do you feel about these sort of community, more community spaces, like, with different sorts of planting and things?
Yeah. So first of all, to me, it's any intervention where we bring nature to people and is a good thing. Too much of the research has been about how do we make environments accessible? How do we get people out to natural parks? And especially in the United States, people have so little free time that the health benefits might just be the fact that, people who have free time just feel better than people who don't have free time. So things like there's a lot of research on the health benefits of gardening. So you have that. Having a community garden like Incredible Edibles is also an environment that facilitates that social interaction with people. So you're getting multiple benefits. You're getting contact with nature, but you're also getting a social interaction, social support, social cohesion, which are all great for our health and well-being. I think one of the things that the COVID pandemic has really taught us is how taking away social interaction has a serious detriment for our mental health. So I think these sorts of interventions are absolutely excellent.
Excellent, that's great, thanks. Well, we're getting near the end, but is there anything else that you'd like to add at this point?
I think I would just say that we need to rewild cities for our mental health and well-being, as well as the benefit for plants and animals. We're losing pollinators, we're losing the diversity of birds. And, in addition, climate change is going to have an impact on both humans and making our cities hotter, and it's going to change what can live in cities. So rewilding cities is a solution. And I would just say that we need to be mindful that the health benefits of planting in residential areas, especially equally throughout a city, so we don't have green gentrification. But I think the individuals who listen to your podcast, the designers, they're creative individuals about the different ways that you can bring nature into cities with small scale interventions like, street tree planting, or putting in a garden or a meeting space in one parking lot space in a city, or an incredible edible or a green wall. And it's their creativity that is really going to help us with both people and planet health.
Absolutely. Well, I've asked you before, and obviously we've got COP26 taking place this year. If you were going to paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like? What would cities look like?
Bringing green space to residential environments where everybody can have contact with nearby nature is the first thing I would do. And then I would have interconnected green spaces for both nature corridors for animals, but also for people to facilitate active travel to and physical activity. I was just in Nice 2 weeks ago, and they have this great promenade right in front of the ocean, and it's just a no-brainer place for walking and running, and just how having a space that enables people to do physical activity will help everybody have contact with nature, but also be healthy.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.